Start off by leaning over and giving her a little kiss, if you would. There you go. And now, tell me your story. Bonnie, you'll start first.
My story?
Yeah, tell me your story. If you had to tell the story of your life in just a minute or two, what would it be?
I was born in Kittitas County, Washington, grew up there, became a school teacher.
What did you teach?
I taught music.
Okay.
And some remedial things in some schools. I met Digby when my dad and I flew into Canada and met him 100 miles from the nearest town, and we got married a year later.
How'd you meet Digby?
Oh, we met in Backwoods of British Columbia. So far back there you had to pipe daylight, you know. But anyway, she had gone with her dad, who had what was the Cessna 182.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she had flown into that part of the country, and I had flown in with my friend. We met at what we call a caribou stomp. That's where all the cowboys get together and the ranches around that area, and they go on for 3 days and they really party.
Huh.
And so I was one of the few that didn't drink, so it caught her attention.
Because I didn't either.
So what impressed you about one another other than the teetotaling?
He was a gentleman. He was just very nice person.
Well,
Handsome too. Yeah.
Got her fooled, but
What impressed you about Bonnie?
she was everything I ever wanted in a woman.
Such as?
Yeah, well, she was kind and considerate, but she was smart. And I always said if I was going to marry, I'm going to marry a big woman so I have big kids that wouldn't have to worry about anything, or a smart woman that wouldn't have to, the kids would be smart enough to get along in life. Kind of turned out that way too.
So tell me the love story from first meeting until you're married.
Well, I lived in the United States and he lived in Canada, so most everything was done by letters. And then maybe once a month or once every other month we'd meet at his sister's house in British Columbia, or he'd drive down and we'd meet at my grandmother's house, or we'd come over to Cle Elum. But mostly it was all by letters. There was no email then. We didn't have long distance capabilities that we could afford. So it was, we only decided to get married after we'd met 3 times.
3 times?
Yep, everything was letters before we ever decided to get married. And then once we made that decision, from there it was from August till the following June.
So you met in August and got married in...
No, we met in March of 1965.
And got engaged in...
August of 65.
And then got married in...
June of 1966.
Wow.
I give her a year to think it over.
But you only were together 3 times between when you met and when you got engaged?
Right.
Wow.
You learn more about a person through writing.
So we'll take a break for the phone call. Any fun ones?
Well, remember the one we took with Tanya? And we slept in the schoolyard?
Oh, I wouldn't call it a vacation necessarily.
It didn't turn out to be a vacation, for sure.
Keno was on his mission, and we needed to go to a small town in northern Washington. And we had a girl with us from Russia who was an exchange student. So it was our 2 girls, Digby, me, and Tanya, the girl. And so we drove up through Chelan, and it was getting kind of late, and the girls were saying, Dad, don't you think we should get a motel? And he's going, oh, no, we'll get to this town up there, and we'll find one farther up. Well, farther we got, the later it got, and we get up to this little town, and I think it's probably midnight or thereabouts, no place to stay. So we had a Aerostar van, and we found this school, and we parked in the schoolyard right next to the building, and then it started raining. The kids were sleeping on the floor and in the seats, and I was trying to sleep in the front seat. Amy was sitting next to me, and she somehow kept putting her foot on the brake. Digby was sleeping on one of the benches that came from the car out under the eaves. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, a police officer came up. What are you people doing here? So that one, that was a funny one. We were really tired though too.
That's good. Digby, tell me about your parents. What were your parents like?
Rough.
In what way? Let's talk about your mom and then your dad.
Every way. My dad was uneducated. He couldn't even hardly sign his name. And they had a terrible marriage. It was one of those kinds, you know, every hollering all the time, and so us kids learned to take off. When they're going to have an argument, we just took off because we heard enough of it. And so it changed. You know, to say I had a good start would be wrong, but to say that I got cried over it would be wrong too. What I did is decided to make up my mind to be different, and I think that was the closest thing I ever came to having a parent, was that every once in a while you couldn't even hug them. They weren't that kind. So every once in a while, if I got a hug, I thought it was payday, you know. But I had parents that were. My mother had 7 children, and my father worked, but he didn't get much work, so she held down 2 jobs. So I had to always remember what was on her plate, and not be judgmental. And so that's kind of how it turned out. But it wasn't. I don't remember ever being taught anything from those parents. What I learned on the streets.
Were you close to your brothers and sisters?
Yes, I was. I'm not sure. We kind of hung together because of the circumstances, but some of them went the way my mother went, you know, and I was just as determined to go the opposite direction. But mostly though, for work ethic, my mother was a hard worker, and we learned that, and it saved us. You know, I could always get a job, because when I had a job, I always kept it. I worked hard, kept my mouth shut, and that's supposed to be what they needed at the time. But
what did your mom do for work?
she is a seamstress for Eaton's of Canada, which is a big department store, and she cleaned the building for commercial buildings. And I often would go with her. That's why I know that, because she was so tired she could hardly keep her eyes open, and so I'd go to help her at night from school, and that's how I got to know her. And she had a very rough life herself, but she never learned from it. That's honest, I guess.
Did you meet your grandparents or get to know them very well?
I got to know one of them, my Grandpa Stacy, and he was a great guy. He was in 3 different worlds. He was a batman. He's in the English Army, a batman first. And then he did World War I, and he lied about his age in World War II to become a cook. So we kind of loved Grandpa Stacy, because he was kind, and he had an eye for what was going on, and he gave us words of encouragement.
That's good.
Yeah.
Honey, tell me about your family. What was it like growing up, and what were your parents like?
My parents were pretty fun. My mother was strict and everything, but we always knew that she loved us and wanted the best. She wanted us to work hard in school and all this kind of stuff. And my dad was a very creative man. During World War II, he wasn't allowed to join the military, because the military put word out that they had another need for him, and he was the one who electrically, I guess you could say, figured out how to wire up these big silos over in the Moses Lake, Soap Lake area, so that the airmen could learn how to navigate by the stars. Only the stars were lights inside these big things, whatever they were.
Wow.
And so he was a creative man, and he had the first television reception in Kittitas County, or east of the mountains, when the people here in Seattle said it couldn't be done. You can't get TV over those big mountains, but he did. And then he always rode a horse, so I always had a horse, and we just had a lot of fun, you know. And my grandma lived right across the field from us, and it was a fun growing up.
They were the opposite of my parents.
Yeah.
They were everything they should be.
Yeah.
But I want to just mention, when Bonnie's dad was going to the fact of not being able to get into the services, he finally got a call to show up in Moses Lake at an employment office, and he sat him down. There was 4 or 5 people in the room, and they said, "You wondered why you can't get into the service, Mr. Morrison?" He said, "Yeah, I have," because he says, you know, he's healthy and strong. He said, "We'll tell you later, but right now we want you to answer some questions." So they had a guy who was a plumber and a guy who was I forget what they called it, but he did hydraulics and those kind of things, an electrician. And they had another man who was there to see what the capabilities of Bonnie's dad was. And when they got done, he said, they all looked at each other and said, "This is our man." And they put him to work. And Bonnie's dad, in fairness, was a genius. He invented stuff, he fixed stuff, he just had that kind of a mind. And so they figured that out, and so he was there till the war ended.
Do you see any of the traits of your parents in your grandchildren? Are those traits going down generation to generation?
Well, one funny thing about it is that on my mother's side of the family, they're from Yugoslavia and Switzerland, Czechoslovakia, places like that, which sometimes are commonly called bohunks. And so bohunks have this certain personality that goes with them. Maybe kind of a stubbornness, and so our son gives himself leeway for some things he wants to say or do by saying it's the bohunk in me. So that I see coming down the line. But I say, well, that's not an excuse. But other than that, I guess I think my dad would be proud of all of them. He only got to meet our 3 kids, never anybody else.
I should really mention that there's a whole town full of bohunks, if you want to call it that. And they were different. If you said to them, "How's your kids doing?" "Why do you ask?"
Yeah.
What
do you want to know for?
What do you want to know for? They're very secretive. They came from a police state and brought it with them. Mm-hmm. And they were very private people, and if they had even the inkling that you were asking about their family, they'd shut you down. It's kind of an interesting place.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the joy your grandchildren have brought you.
Oh my goodness, they are, all of them, they're all best friends with one another. There's 15 kids. And from the littlest, who's 5, to the oldest, who's almost 20, they're all best friends. And when they get together, we always get hugs and everything like that. And they are playing and talking. There's never fighting, never squabbling. And that's what we just absolutely enjoy. And they're all smart. They're honor students and just top notch. We have the best.
Kind of like your family. You know, I felt the same way. They're all smart kids and nice kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Digby's had a life of service, and you've had a life of service. Tell me what service has meant to you in your lives.
Well, probably, as you know, I'm in charge of a bunch of people that make things for people who need it. And so that's been a pretty fun challenge, because you know that you're making something for someone you'll never meet most of the time. And you just know that it's going to help them get better, feel better, when you don't ever even see them. So, and to encourage other people to feel the same way, it's been very rewarding.
I think my life of service came first from my family. The one thing that I did learn is that when we had to reach out to people that were exemplary. By that I mean that they had to be different than us, so we could step up. And that's the kind of way it turned out for me, and that's probably why I ended up serving people as I do, because I just naturally love them. And I know that I never had that, so I try wherever I go to give them a little piece of myself. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but mostly it does.
I think he looks for people to help. That's kind of who he is.
What is your most prized possession, Digby? Material thing, the most prized possession you have or have ever owned?
Material, if you include my family, is my blessing.
No, not other than your family.
Well,
something you're proud of, something you like a lot.
I think it revolves around when I first went to work. I was 16 years old, and my dad said, "I'm tired of feeding you, go to work." And I thought education was good, so I had to go to night school and to get myself up to at least to a grade of 10 or 11, and then finally I had to get the GED. But I remember that it was both bitter and sweet when I was told to go out of school. I was pretty unhappy.
But let me tell you how quickly he got the GED. We were going to take a real estate broker's test, and we found out on Friday night that the test was going to be the following week and that you had to have a high school diploma, and he didn't have one. So Monday morning he went to Central Washington University and said, I understand I could get my GED here. And they said, yes, we're giving the test tomorrow morning. So here's this little study guide. So all he did was study Monday evening, and Tuesday morning he went and aced the test, just like that. So he has that certificate, and I think it shows that he's capable of doing anything he decides he wants to do. Are you proud of that possession?
Yeah, I think that is the fact. I learned that I could learn. It was difficult. It was harder than most, but what you possess comes hard. And if you don't sacrifice, it doesn't mean much.
Bonnie, any prized possessions?
Probably pictures of ancestors and things like that. Because, you know, as we're saying that what our kids are doing now with their kids, we have to realize that maybe some of what we are came from our ancestors. Because you hear about, you know, your Aunt Polly or your Uncle Joe or your Uncle Johnny and things like that. So I think to be able to look at the pictures and know that's who they were, I like that a lot.
So Digby, how did you ask her to marry you?
I didn't.
What happened?
Well, I just talked to her about what she liked and didn't like, and I kept saying to her different things about what if a couple did this and a couple did that, and just kind of fell into it. I was too scared to ask her at first.
So when did you realize you were engaged? How'd that happen, Mom?
Probably when we decided that this was a possibility and maybe we should get an engagement ring.
So, so you picked out a ring.
No, we did.
We picked it out together, and
Good.
anyway, the church had taught me, I've been in church long enough by then to know you have to marry up.
Yeah.
So I figured I'd better cinch this one.
Good. So tell me about the ceremony.
The ceremony was in Ellensburg, and it was performed by Orrin Mann, who is Terry Mann's uncle, great uncle, or something like that.
Interesting.
And so our two families were not quite getting along, and so it was a pretty goofy time, but it was beautiful.
Good. So why weren't the families getting along, Digby?
You had to know my family.
Were there some colorful characters there?
Boy, I have two brothers, we're fine, but the sisters, they just...
And your mother.
My mother, you know, they chew out a cabbage until it was raw. Couldn't leave things alone.
So they didn't warm up to Bonnie right away?
I would say they didn't warm up to anybody. They
Especially to my mother.
Oh,
That's
so
where
the
the
two
fight-
moms didn't get along?
Oh,
Right.
no.
Did they ever reconcile after you guys got married, or?
They just stood back and glared at each other, but that was it. And then they didn't see each other very often, and that was even better.
So did you have a honeymoon?
Yes.
Where'd you go, Bonnie?
We went to Victoria, BC.
Oh, nice.
We had we got married on a Saturday. I think he had to go to work on Tuesday, so this was pretty quick.
I'd been a free ranger, and I had to get a regular job.
So what was your work before getting married?
I was cleaning brush, and I was in the Air Force. I did a lot of things. I was trying to get myself together, I guess. And the end result was that that did happen, and I got a regular job at the post office.
Okay.
Yeah, so I lasted there about a year until Bonnie's dad called me up and said, why don't you come be an electrician? And he had an electrical outfit, so I said, sure, why not?
So what was it like in those days when he was learning to be an electrician, Bonnie?
That was kind of interesting because my dad had been an electrician for a lot of years, and so he was teaching Digby just right from the beginning of everything. And then we'd only been married about 4 years, and my dad had a bad heart attack, and then his memory was just a little bit wonky. And so by then, Digby had figured things out and ended up taking over my dad's business. So he's a quick learner.
How long did you do that?
Oh, probably, what, 15 years?
Mm-hmm.
Those were good years.
Hard.
So children are coming now.
Yeah.
But why were the years hard, Bonnie?
Because we're in a small town and there's no big money anywhere. You had to really work hard for every nickel you made.
Do you remember what you made in a year back then or in a month?
Well, it was on and off. You have to remember that was when we had our big recession in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And the dollar went, I mean, the interest went from about 6% all the way up to 20. So things, you know, in the construction trade kind of stopped. What saved us is that we were in a small town where everybody, about 85% of people owned their own homes, and they're all getting ready to retire. So when we sold the homes, they got something like 12 or 14%.
Well, you've jumped ahead into when we became real estate brokers.
Oh, yeah. I did jump ahead. We decided to get out of electrical business, which at that time was really tough. And we went into the real estate business, was really tough, but we knew a few things.
And you did that together?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like, working together?
Oh, we loved it. 24 hours a day, which some people say they can't be done. I think it's the most wonderful thing ever.
Good.
It was just great.
And how long did you do this real estate business?
Oh, close to 20 years.
Wow. And in what cities did you do it?
In Cleveland.
Just in Cleveland.
Kittitas County.
And was Bonnie flying at that time?
Yes.
No, I wasn't.
You were.
No, because my dad
Oh,
died.
that's right. You did just when we were electrical.
Yeah.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because my dad, when he had his heart attack in '70, we had to sell the airplane so he could have open heart surgery. So that was the end of my flying too.
Oh, interesting. So when did the first child come along, and who was that?
Keno.
And what was that like, Bonnie?
Well, it was an experience, I'll tell you, because it took him 32 hours of labor before he was ready to be born. And when he was born, he was probably the biggest baby on record in Kittitas County for the year, 10 pounds, 10 ounces.
And what kind of child was he like, Digby, growing up?
Say it again, please.
What kind of child was Keno like growing up?
He was a great kid. I never had to say much to him. He just was a thinker, smart from the word go, and he seemed to assess everything pretty well. And the only time I had to discipline one time is I threw him to the floor, and I threatened him. I would never touched him, but I threatened him because he was conning his sisters. He'd say, "Come on, help me clean my room, and I'll help you clean yours." And he pulled this Tom Sawyer trick time and time again, and I finally threw him to the floor and said, "Now, that's got to stop. You make a promise, you better keep it." And his eyes were as big as saucers, but because I never spoke to him like that. But that's the only time.
Is Keno more like Bonnie or more like you, Digby?
He's more like Bonnie. Bonnie's a detail person, and she doesn't miss very much. And I'm a little scattered when it comes to that. I've got more of the artist in me, I guess. But Keno is, he concentrates, and you could build a wall around him and he wouldn't notice.
Do you see that in Keno's children, that same trait?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He has a son on a mission that is finding out a lot of things, but his letters are amazing. The detail in them, you're almost there.
Mm-hmm.
Who was your second child?
Amy.
Tell me about Amy as a child and then growing up.
Well, Amy was an independent little girl, but all you had to ever do to get her to do things was just talk to her. And if she could understand what you wanted her to do or what she shouldn't do, then that was fine. But she had to understand. You couldn't just say no because I said so, because that doesn't work for anybody. And so she was the bigger of all three of our kids. She was 11 pounds, 3 ounces.
But the wonderful thing about that girl, she'd never tell a lie.
Oh yeah, she wouldn't tell a lie no matter what, ever. No matter if she was going to be in trouble, she would not lie.
Any good stories about Amy growing up?
Yeah, I think you better step in the one with the car. She drove the car down to pick Keno.
Oh yeah, this is pretty good. When she was about, she must have been about 11 or 12, And Keno had a job at a little restaurant, 24-hour restaurant. And so he left his car at home, which was kind of a little puddle jumper, and the girls decided that they should wash the car and surprise him. So we were at work, and after they washed the car, they thought, oh, we don't want Keno to have to walk home from the restaurant after work at 10:30 at night and it's dark. We'll just take it to him. So Amy drove, and Miley, the sister, was with her, and some other girl, and they didn't just drive 2 blocks to the restaurant. It took them 8 miles. They went up and down all the different streets, and 8 miles, and they didn't tell us. And so nobody said a word. Keno didn't say a word. We found out about it a week later when they decided to tell us the truth. And I mean, we wanted to just laugh our heads off, you know. But we had to pretend to be pretty stern. Tell them what this could have happened.
I know. I took a deep sigh of relief because I knew if it ever hit anybody, you know, my name would be in the books, all right.
So your third child?
Is Miley.
What was Miley like?
Miley was a fun little girl, but she was kind of sickly all the time. Maybe it's because whatever food you put in front of her, she'd say, I don't like it. And she didn't even taste it. You could put chocolate pudding in front of her and she'd say, I don't like it. And so she was like weighing 44 pounds when she was 9 years old. So we had to just keep working with her until finally she chose to do things on her own, and she's a fantastic girl. All grown up now with 4 kids of her own, of course.
She's one of those girls that the children love. She just step in on every child, and even now in her career, that's what she does. She looks after kids that are unmanageable, you know, in the standard form of life. But she takes it, and they like her a lot. So it's kept her. It's a dangerous job in some ways. You know, some of those kids are unpredictable.
Any more children?
That's it.
That's enough.
Grandchildren.
How did they get along, the 3 kids?
They did really well, because I told them that unless you were all best friends, how could we possibly let you have friends come over, or you go somewhere? How could you get along with them if you can't get along with your own siblings? So they learned how to be best friends, and to this day, they are all best friends.
Now you're seeing that wonderful logic that comes from my wife. She always had an answer for everything, and if she didn't, she'd get back to them. And why I mention that is that they have developed that trait in themselves. They have, would you say, refined life.
They're patient. And,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What was the secret to raising obedient children?
You explain to them why you want to do things, and then they understand. But if you just, I mean, you have to be a shepherd rather than a sheep herder. You can't just push people around. But if you lead them and take them by example, then why would they do otherwise?
Well, Bonnie raised them alongside her knee, not across it. And they understood that, and there was lots of love. And over the years, we saw this trait where they mostly got it from their mother, is that they really cared for other people. And we were proud of that, because that's how we taught them.
Tell me about the church. How you come to become a member of the church?
I was investigating several churches, and I can only tell you that I can't explain why, but I used to go down in the summertime to the churches that had their windows open, and sit by the window and listen to the music and the preaching, and I was drawn like a pin to a magnet. I never could explain it, but I was joined the Canadian Air Force, and there was a crew chief there. He said, I understand you're looking for a church. And I said, well, I'm not sure I'm looking for a church. I've been to several, but I feel a need to be there. He said, you just haven't gone to the right church yet, Digby. And he invited me to come to the Mormon church, as he called it at the time. And I came there, and I only had to be told once. I knew with all my heart that it was it.
What has the church meant to you in your life?
Well, it's been my guide, my direction, and my love.
What would you be without it?
Not much. The best way to say it is that when something is so true to you, and you realize it, and then you say, well, here's your opportunity, Digby. God does play favorites, and He's invited you home. So, I came home.
Your turn, Bob.
I think, as I think about the way we raised our kids, I think, you know, a lot of things in life, you feel you have to make a decision. Do I do this? Do I do this? Is this right? Is this wrong? But for the kids, all these decisions were pre-made. They didn't have to think, should I do this? Should I do that? They just knew that Heavenly Father has guidelines for the way we live. And so their decisions were made ahead of time. If someone were to say, do you want to smoke this cigarette? They didn't have to think about it. They already knew the answer before it was ever asked. So I think the church provides a way that we can live life more freely, in the sense that you don't have to stumble over hard decisions or uncomfortable ones. You already know the answer first. And it's made our kids who they are. I'm sure of it. We never said, okay, get up, you have to come to church. It was just, this is what we do. So we didn't have any rebellion or anything like that.
I found out you have to have a sense of humor. We had a real estate office. A guy came in one day and he looked at us and said, you Mormons are all nothing but a bunch of hypocrites. And I looked at him rather startled. I said, I have a little Irish in me, so I said, why don't you come and join us? We got room for one more. And he looked at me for a minute, and then he started laughing. He said, I asked for that. And I said, yeah. I said, what got you so heated? And he explained, and we talked it through and became a good friend.
What do you think heaven's going to be like, Digby?
Well, if it's just a fifth of what they say, I'd be so happy. That to find yourself in a situation where all men and women are brothers and sisters can't be anything but wonderful. And that the Lord's plan to bring us all together is as good as you can get. And I would invite anybody that feels a little left out to come and be with us and join the whole family of a ward or of the stake, as we call it.
Advice for your great-great-grandchildren, yet unborn, perhaps. Give them some life lessons that you've learned that you'd like them to know.
I think I can answer that. I would tell them first thing is stop and think. That's a hard thing to do. And when you stop and think, don't get caught up in yourself. The world is full of people that are wonderful, and just because you have the answers doesn't mean the people around you do. You want to be so respectful, and you can teach the gospel by living it more than you can teach it by talking about it. And I have found out over the years that if you just listen, step back a bit and listen, you get a lot of things out of life.
And I think every child should watch that little cartoon Bambi, because there's somebody in it that looks at Bambi and says, another little animal says, if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. Well, if everybody in this world followed that little guideline, we would just have a wonderful, wonderful world. Can't go wrong with that one.
Digby, look your bride in the eyes and tell her you love her, and why.
Oh, she knows it.
Tell her.
I love you.
I love you too.
I love you more.
I love you most.
Another